the IDSF conference, Israel's Defense and Security Forum. My name is Yissachar. I'm head of research at the IDSF. We're very honored to have you today with us. It's quite a delegation, and we hope it's going to be an interesting conference. With us today is Brigadier General Amir Aviv. He's the CEO and founder of IDSF-Habithonistim. Yossi Kupavas, Brigadier General, the former head of research of the IDSF Intelligence Corps. He's the director of our research department. Morris Hirsch, Lieutenant Colonel. He used to be the chief army prosecutor in Judea and Samaria. And Major Lilach Ashtar, she's a serial glass ceiling breaker and doing a very active reserve service even as we speak. She came far from the Golan Heights, particularly for this conference. And we're very honored to have all of you with us today. We're here to discuss the strategic assessment for Israel. Now you have the executive summary copies right there at the entrance, so I welcome all of you to take a copy. This is the executive summary in English of a 370-page long strategic assessment in Hebrew, so it's quite a carry, which we presented to Israeli senior officials, the Prime Minister, head of Mossad, head of National Security Council, chief of police, and other key figures in the Israeli security establishment and the decision-maker echelon. One of the senior officials made a joke in self-humor, said, "I'm struggling to cope with 370 characters, let alone 370 pages." So it was quite challenging. But I'm a very serious guy, and we were honored to be invited. So it often happens, both in Israel and around the world, that we are the victims of our own assumptions. Quote, "On Friday night, we all went to bed, despite what we've seen with our own eyes beyond the canal, not out of recognition that on Saturday, a war would break." That is Major General Gorodish, used to command the Southern Command in the Yom Kippur War. On the eve of October 6, 1973, there was very little anticipation that one of the deadliest and certainly the most traumatizing war in Israeli history would break. So what we call the conception, I don't know if to say arrogance, but the belief that there was no chance that both the Egyptians and the Syrians would go to war. It's part of the conception that took the lives of 2,656 soldiers, my uncle included, and the very idea that there is a certain conventional wisdom that must not be challenged. In fact, the chief of intelligence, Eli Zaira, was not only not listening to young officers in the field who saw Egyptian and Syrian soldiers amassing on the other side of the border, they were also not only not heard, but also not promoted. So history, as they say, does not repeat itself, but very often it rhymes. And what we've seen along the years is an unwillingness, both in Israel and the international community, to accept the leaving the very familiar landscapes to favor a new concept. Quote, "So pervasive was the concept that Eisenhower and his colleagues regarded it not as an intellectual construct, but as a description of reality itself. It was not open to debate." So with these words, Michael Doron described the Eisenhower Doctrine to the Middle East, basically alienating natural allies like Israel and the UK, to favor appeasement of the Arab world, who was at the time much more hostile to Israel. And 8 years into his presidency, Eisenhower changed his doctrine, realized it was a mistake, but then again, the truth proved the exact opposite. The interest of the US and of the international community is not to alienate Israel, but to empower it. And this is the door, both of the Arab world to Washington and vice versa. Operation Guardian of the Walls, I want to connect it to actual events. May 2021, fast forward. I think, and what we've written in this report, very few people in the Israel security establishment anticipated an event with such high intensity, with so many locations at once. And the idea of both riots by Israeli Arabs and Bedouins inside Israeli cities and around the country, with over 4,000 missiles from Gaza in just 11 days, was not something that we're dutifully prepared to. We also remember the convergence of events. So an event that was widely romanticized, I have to say, in some places as some sort of an uprising against a political situation, while we know, and this is, by the way, a research department, you're going to have some of it in your inbox next week in the newsletter and in our website, that Hamas, as a Palestinian insurgency group, terror group, has anticipated the weakness of the Palestinian Authority. They wanted to flex their muscles vis-a-vis their rivals in the Fatah, and they were actually surprised themselves by the sheer intensity of respondents on the Palestinian street. That, combined with political instability in Israel, sensing that, combined with the Ramadan and tens of thousands of worshippers on the Temple Mount, that very soon became a hotspot for clashes. All of that put together was not a scenario that Israel prepared to work. And we have to say, we've been meeting senior officials in the Israeli security establishment recently, and we see how things have changed ever since and how the preparedness is much more serious than what it used to be. But still, we are far from where we need to be. And that brings me to maybe the bottom line of this report, is that Israel has not conceptualized the situation yet. It has been preparing for the previous war and not the future war. And in a sense, a country that does not have a national security strategy like the United States, a written strategy, a very clear lodestar, has not conceptualized the situation here as both a domestic front and an external front, the situation inside Israel as a national campaign. And what we are saying is that you cannot regard it as an arena-based campaign. Israel's security establishment in many events looks at Gaza, Lod, Jerusalem, Lebanon, Iran, and we are putting all of this together. In fact, we met in Amir's home in the garden. We've been all the respectful, dignified officers, major generals and others, academics, and we started brainstorming how we see basically 3+1, all the campaigns put together. We see a Pan-Palestinian campaign inside Israel, both Israeli Arabs, Bedouins, and the Palestinians in the territories. We see the second cycle, which is the Iranian-regional campaign for both nuclear capabilities and regional hegemony, and then the delegitimization campaign around the world, basically delegitimizing Israel's right to exist. +1, which is events on the world stage, superpowers and the likes. And we claim that you cannot understand this security threat map without understanding all 3+1 combined. And gradually we started seeing the pieces of the puzzle coming together. We claim that Israel does not have a mindset of national campaign. We do have one vis-a-vis Iran. We see how Israel acts against the Iranian entrenchments in Syria. We see how it actually enforces the idea that Iranians must not entrench themselves in Syria by very active Air Force strikes policy, sometimes under the radar, and sometimes Israel actually states that it has done that. But we don't see the same reactivity inside Israel, around the territories, around the sphere between the Mediterranean and the river, to actually get a grasp of a national campaign that is very often converged. So while the other side has long took a grip of that and understood that, we still didn't get our act together. We still are not preparing for a multi-front war, a scenario in which we are going to face several fronts at once, and this is part of the idea. A little bit about the movement and why we're here today. So we have a national security-oriented movement with over 15,000 members, led by senior IDF officials in reserve, from Mossad, Shin Bet, police, and others. And we really put forward a very clear national vision. We claim that Israeli national security cannot exist without a national ethos. So we kind of juxtapose both things together. For example, we take the delegitimization campaign and juxtapose it with Israeli education system. We basically say that our youth is not nearly sufficiently taught about national ethos and Zionism, which is at the core of national security. Why do 18-year-olds recruit to the military? Is it just technical security, or is it national security with affinity to national ethos? You cannot expect officers to be technicians or bureaucrats. they have to come with certain bright eyes, certain commitment, affinity to land and Zionism and the idea of a nation. And for that, the education system needs to take off the gloves and start doing it. By the way, we have started a program in Israeli high schools and in mechinot, pre-military movement. And we're telling them, last week I was in one of those programs, and I told them, your bright eyes, your affinity to Israel is our most valuable national security component. The idea of detaching national from security is basically winning one battle but losing the war. Strategically, we must have a national ethos to deal with national challenges. So you're going to hear about all of this today, and the fact that we have a research department also allows us to channel all of these positions to you. We're going to start with Amir Avivi talking about the changes in the balance of power in the region. Maurice Hirsch will talk about delegitimization, Yossi Cooper-Wasser about the Iranian campaign, and Yissachar about the Palestinian arena. So we really encourage you here to ask questions. We know that we present to you something that not too many people, not too many think tanks or security organizations present, but we do present a very strong voice in the Israeli public that needs to be channeled. We look at the Palestinian campaign as one. We ask questions. Is the two-state solution really the answer to what the Arab national feelings in Jerusalem, in Lod, in Acre, in Jaffa? Are we witnessing a Palestinization of the arena led by Hamas? Is there sort of a trend of identification with Hamas among young Israeli Arabs, and how can we confront that? We're looking at the Iranian campaign as one, a nuclear weapon, not just as a weapon program, but also as a means to grab regional hegemony. And we look at the delegitimization campaign coordinated with NGOs within Israel, with foreign funding, as an attempt to erode the Israeli affinity to land, to delegitimize it, and basically not only to manufacture information, but also to present a non-precise image to the world. And we view all of these as threats to national security, or at least challenges to national security. We do want to hear you out. We know that many of these conferences, between me and you, and nobody's listening, have people come over, they nod politely, they chew a bagel, and they go home. And what we want to do is to have a discourse. We encourage you to ask actively, ask questions. We're a country with not too much let's say, ice-breaking space for maneuver. If you enter into a cab right around 40 seconds into the ride, and the cab driver asks you, how come a nice young person like you is not yet married, and I happen to have this cousin. So the shield is not precise, the ice is not precisely a factor in this. So we do encourage these questions about how we can prepare for the next war and how we can enforce governability and governance right now, as opposed to those processes taking place in front of us. With that, let me welcome General Avivi to the stage, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, all.